My name is Isabella. I was 27 years old when I finally believed I was about to live on my own. Not in a dramatic, running away sense, just the quiet kind of independence you build slowly, saving every extra dollar, skipping small comforts, telling yourself it will be worth it when you finally have a place that's yours. I had found the apartment 2 weeks earlier. Small, nothing fancy, but clean and close to work. The landlord asked for first month's rent and a deposit. A lot of money all at once. But money I already had. Money I had been saving for years. I didn't keep it in my own account. That was my first mistake. When I was younger, my mom had insisted it was safer if she helped manage my savings. She said she was better with banks, better with paperwork. I trusted her. She was my mother. And every time I added to that account, she told me how proud she was of me for being responsible. So when the landlord asked for the deposit, I wasn't nervous. I called my mom that night, excited for the first time in a long while. I told her I was ready, that I needed the money transferred so I could secure the apartment. There was a pause on the line, just long enough to make my stomach tighten. She said she needed to talk to me first. That's when I knew something was wrong. I went to my mom's house the next morning. She hadn't said much on the phone, just that it would be better to talk in person. Her tone had been careful, the way it gets when someone already knows they've crossed a line but hasn't decided how to justify it yet. I told myself not to panic. There had to be an explanation. Maybe there was a delay. Maybe she'd moved the money temporarily. Maybe I was overthinking it. That hope lasted exactly as long as it took me to pull into her driveway. The first thing I noticed wasn't the house. It was the truck. A large, shiny pickup sat where my old car usually parked when I visited. Dark paint, spotless tires, still wearing a temporary dealer tag. It looked completely out of place, like something dropped into the wrong story. I just sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring at it. My chest tightened. Her boyfriend, Mark, stepped out of the front door right then, keys in his hand. He was smiling, wide and easy, the kind of smile people have when they're proud of something they didn't earn themselves. Nice, right? He called out when he saw me. Been needing something reliable for a while. I didn't answer. I got out of my car slowly, my eyes still on the truck. Every detail felt too sharp. The newness, the confidence in his voice, the fact that he didn't look surprised to see me. My mom appeared behind him, already nervous. She wiped her hands on a dish towel like she needed something to do with them. "You're early," she said. I looked at her. "Where's my money?" She sighed, like I'd asked an inconvenient question instead of the only one that mattered. "We needed to make a decision," she said, and it came up fast. I felt lightheaded. "What decision?" She stepped aside, gesturing toward the truck, as if showing it off might soften the blow. Mark needed a vehicle. His old one finally gave out. He can't work without one. I stared at her, waiting for the part where this stopped being insane. "You used my savings," I said slowly. She didn't deny it. "It wasn't all of it," she said quickly. "Just most of it. We'll figure out the rest." Most of it. The words didn't register right away. My brain lagged behind, trying to protect me from understanding what that actually meant. "That was my apartment deposit," I said. "I told you that." "I know," she replied. "But apartments will still be there. This was urgent." Mark shifted uncomfortably, finally sensing the tension. "Look," he said, holding up his hands. "I didn't know it was your money specifically. Your mom said it was family savings." "Family savings." I laughed, a short, empty sound that surprised even me. "It was my savings," I said. "Mine. I worked for that." My mom's voice hardened. "Don't make this into something it's not." "What is it then?" I asked. She crossed her arms, defensive now. "You're young. You can rebuild. Mark needs to work now. This was about practicality. Practicality. I looked back at the truck, at the way the sunlight reflected off the hood, at how solid and real it looked compared to the future I'd been picturing just the night before. So that's it? I asked. You decided for me? She hesitated, then nodded. I'm your mother. I did what I thought was best. Mark cleared his throat. I really appreciate this, he said awkwardly. I'll pay it back eventually. Eventually, he got into the truck then, like the conversation was over. The engine roared to life, loud and confident. He backed out of the driveway, waved once, and drove off smiling. I watched him go, the sound of the engine fading down the street, taking years of my planning with it. My mom stood beside me, quiet now. You can start over, she said softly, like she was offering comfort. You're good at that. I turned to her slowly, and he needed it now, I said. She nodded. Exactly. That was the moment something inside me shifted. It wasn't just anger, it was clarity. I hadn't lost my apartment deposit by accident. It had been given away because my future was considered flexible, and his wasn't. And standing there in that driveway, staring at the empty space where the truck had been, I understood something I hadn't let myself admit before. In my family, I was never the priority. I was the backup plan. We went inside after the truck disappeared down the street. The house felt smaller than it ever had, not because anything had changed physically, but because the future I'd been carrying with me, the apartment, the independence, the sense of finally stepping into my own life, had nowhere to sit anymore. My mom moved around the kitchen, straightening things that didn't need to be straightened. She poured herself coffee she didn't drink. I stood near the counter, still holding my bag like I might leave at any second. You should sit, she said. I'm fine, I replied. She took a breath, like she was preparing for a difficult conversation she believed she could manage if she stayed calm enough. I know this isn't ideal, she began, but you have to understand the position I was in. I looked at her. You were in my position, I said. It was my money. She winced slightly, but pressed on. Mark was about to lose his job. He needed a truck, not a want, a need. And I needed a place to live, I said. She waved that away gently, as if brushing dust off a shelf. You're staying with me for now. You're not on the street. The dismissal stung more than I expected. That deposit was everything I had, I said. I told you that. She nodded. And I'm proud of you for saving it. Truly. But life happens. Sometimes you have to adapt. Adapt. It was always that word with her. Adapt. Adjust. Be flexible. All of it sounded reasonable until you realized who was always expected to do the bending. I've been adapting my whole life, I said quietly. When do I get to move forward? She sighed, finally sitting across from me. You're young. You don't see it yet. But starting over is easier when you don't have responsibilities weighing you down. I stared at her. You mean like a boyfriend? Her jaw tightened. That's not fair. Neither is this, I said. She leaned forward, her voice dropping into the tone she used when she wanted to sound compassionate and firm at the same time. Mark doesn't have the luxury of starting over. He's older. If he loses work, things spiral fast. You'll bounce back. There it was, the sentence she'd been circling since the moment I pulled into the driveway. You can start over? I repeated it slowly. And he needed it now. She nodded, relieved that I finally seemed to understand. Exactly. I felt something in my chest go hollow. You didn't ask me, I said. You didn't even warn me. I didn't want to stress you out, she replied. You didn't want to give me a chance to say no. Her eyes flashed. I'm your mother. I'm allowed to make decisions for the family. For the family, I echoed. Or for him. She stood abruptly, irritation finally breaking through her calm. You're making this about the wrong thing. Mark is good to me. He treats me well. I wasn't going to let him struggle when I had the means to help. You didn't, I said. I did. Silence stretched between us. She crossed her arms. The same posture she'd taken when I was younger and pushed back too hard. "You're acting like this was done to hurt you." "It was done without me," I said. "That hurts enough." She looked away, staring at the wall. "I raised you to be strong," she said, "to be independent." I almost laughed. "You raised me to clean up messes that weren't mine," I said. "To be the one who could handle losing something because someone else needed it more." Her voice softened. "That's not how I see you, but that's how you treat me." The words hung there, undeniable. She didn't respond, not because she didn't hear me, but because there was nothing she could say that would change what had already happened. Finally, she spoke again, quieter now. "We'll figure something out." "You always do." I realized then that this conversation wasn't about fixing anything. It was about convincing me to accept it, and standing there, looking at my mother, the person I had trusted with my future, I understood something with painful clarity. She didn't steal my savings because she didn't love me. She used them because she believed I would survive the loss, because I always had. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I wanted to keep proving her right. I left my mom's house not long after that conversation ended, not because it had been resolved, but because there was nothing left to say. The words had already done their damage, and staying would have only meant standing in the same space where my future had quietly been traded for someone else's convenience. I sat in my car for a while before driving off. The driveway was empty now. The truck was gone. The space it had occupied felt like a missing tooth. Impossible not to notice once you knew it was there. I kept replaying the sound of the engine in my head, the confidence in the way it pulled away, the ease with which Mark had accepted something that had taken me years to build. He hadn't looked back. That was the part that stuck with me. I drove aimlessly for a while, not ready to go anywhere in particular. My phone buzzed with a message from the landlord, a polite reminder about the deposit deadline. I stared at it until the screen dimmed, then turned the phone face down. I didn't respond. What was there to say? "Sorry. My mom bought her boyfriend a truck with my savings didn't feel like something anyone would understand." I ended up parked on a quiet street, engine off, hands resting uselessly in my lap. That was when the weight of it finally settled in. Not just the loss of money, but the loss of momentum. The sense of moving forward I'd been carrying for months evaporated all at once. For so long, everything I did had been about that apartment. The overtime shifts, the skipped weekends, the careful budgeting. I had told myself that once I crossed that threshold, once I had a place of my own, things would finally feel balanced. Now, I was right back where I'd started, except this time, it wasn't because I hadn't worked hard enough. It was because someone else had decided my progress was optional. What made it worse was how normal it all felt to them. To my mom, this wasn't betrayal. It was resource management. To Mark, it was luck. Good timing. Someone else's generosity. And to both of them, my disappointment was just an obstacle to be smoothed over with reassurances about resilience and starting over. They weren't worried about me. They were confident I'd absorb it. That night, I stayed at a friend's place. I didn't explain everything, just enough to justify why I wasn't going home. She offered sympathy, snacks, distraction. I smiled and thanked her, but my mind kept drifting back to the same image. Mark behind the wheel, my money under the hood, my future shrinking in the rearview mirror. The next morning, reality hit harder. I checked my bank account, hoping against logic that maybe there had been some misunderstanding. There wasn't. The numbers were exactly what my mom had said they'd be. Enough to sting, not enough to fix anything. I emailed the landlord and told him I'd need more time. He responded politely, but firmly. There were other applicants. He couldn't hold the unit without the deposit. That was it. The apartment was gone. I sat on the edge of my bed and let myself feel it then. Not just sadness, but something closer to grief. not for a space I never lived in, but for the version of myself who had believed that saving carefully and trusting the people closest to me would be enough. That version of me had been naive. As the day went on, messages came in from my mom. She asked if I'd cooled off. She said we could talk later. She reminded me again that I was strong, adaptable, capable. Each message landed the same way, like reassurance meant to quiet me, not repair anything. I didn't respond, because something had shifted overnight. Watching Mark drive away hadn't just cost me money. It had shown me, with painful clarity, where I stood. Not as a daughter, not as family, but as a resource. Something flexible, something expected to stretch when needed. And once you see yourself that way in someone else's eyes, it's hard to unsee it. I didn't know yet what I was going to do next. All I knew was this: I wasn't going to be the one who quietly paid for someone else's choices anymore. Once the shock wore off, something else took its place. Recognition. Lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling of my friend's spare room, I started replaying moments from years back, ones I'd dismissed at the time because each incident, on its own, seemed small, manageable, easy to justify. Together, they told a different story. This wasn't the first time my needs had been treated as optional. When I was younger, it was always framed as necessity. If my mom needed help covering rent one month, I helped. If she needed a loan to get through a rough patch, I dipped into whatever savings I had. She always promised to pay it back, and sometimes she did, just not fully, and never on time. But I let it go, because she was my mom, because she was struggling, because I could handle it. That phrase followed me everywhere. When I delayed buying a car so she could replace an appliance, when I stayed home longer than I wanted to because it was better for both of us, when I took on extra shifts instead of asking for help, every sacrifice was praised as maturity, as responsibility, as proof that I was strong. What no one said out loud was that strength had quietly become my obligation. If I complained, I was reminded of how much harder things were for other people. If I hesitated, I was told how lucky I was to even have the option to say no. And if I did say no, even once, it was treated like a betrayal. Looking back, I realized how often my mom had relied on my flexibility to make her own life easier. How often my plans had been adjusted to accommodate her emergencies. How often I'd been asked to wait just a little longer for things that were supposed to be mine. The apartment deposit wasn't an exception. It was an escalation. The difference this time was that my sacrifice wasn't even requested. It was assumed, taken, reframed as the logical choice before I had a chance to object. And the explanation was always the same: you can start over. I understood now what that really meant. It didn't mean she believed in my resilience. It meant she trusted that I would absorb the damage quietly, that I wouldn't walk away, that I wouldn't draw a line that forced her to choose. I'd spent years proving her right. The realization made my stomach turn. I thought about Mark again, not just the truck, but the way my mom had positioned him as fragile, urgent, in need of protection. How quickly she'd placed his stability above my independence. It wasn't about him being more important. It was about him being less capable. And somehow, that had made him the priority. I started to see how my role in my mom's life had solidified over time. I wasn't the child who needed care. I was the one who provided it. Emotionally, financially, practically. That role came with praise when it was convenient, and resentment when it wasn't. I realized I'd never been asked what I wanted without an expectation attached. Support always came with a condition. Love always came with a calculation. And now, for the first time, the cost had been too high to ignore. I wasn't just disappointed. I was done pretending this was normal. The next morning, I made a list. Not of what I'd lost, but of what I needed to change if I didn't want this to happen again. It wasn't dramatic, Just a few quiet decisions written down in my notebook. Separate accounts, clear boundaries, no more shared access, no more automatic yes. As I wrote, I felt something unfamiliar settle in. Resolve. This wasn't about punishing my mom. It wasn't about Mark or the truck anymore. It was about acknowledging that the pattern would continue as long as I kept playing my part in it. And I couldn't do that anymore, because starting over wasn't the problem. Starting over for everyone else was, I didn't announce my decision. There was no speech, no ultimatum, no dramatic confrontation where I listed everything she'd done wrong. I'd learned by then that explanations only gave people something to argue with. So instead, I started changing things quietly. The first thing I did was open my own bank account. It felt strangely nerve-wracking, sitting in that small office with a banker who didn't know my history, who didn't see me as flexible or dependable, or someone who would figure it out. To her, I was just a customer, an adult, someone entitled to control their own money. When I walked out with my new debit card, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that I should have done this years ago. That afternoon, I transferred what little I had left into the new account. It wasn't much, but it was mine, for the first time in a long while. Nothing about my finances depended on someone else's judgment. I didn't tell my mom right away. I waited until she noticed. It took less than a week. She called me one evening, her tone already sharp. Why did I get a notification that you removed my access? I took a breath before answering. Because I need to manage my own money. There was a pause, then a scoff. After everything I've done for you, I'm not punishing you, I said calmly. I'm protecting myself. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. So this is what you're doing now? Drawing lines like I'm some kind of thief? You took my savings without asking, I replied. That's not a misunderstanding. Her voice rose immediately. I did it for a reason. I told you that. Mark needed it, and I needed it too, I said. She sighed loudly, the sound she used when she wanted to signal that I was being unreasonable. You're being dramatic. You'll get back on your feet. You always do. That sentence might have worked on me once. This time, it didn't. I'm not talking about this again, I said. The account is mine now. Silence followed. Not stunned silence, angry silence. You're being selfish, she said finally. I raised you better than this. I felt the familiar pull then, the urge to soften my tone, to reassure her, to remind her that I still loved her, that I wasn't abandoning her. I didn't do it. I can love you and still say no, I said. Those things aren't opposites. She snapped back immediately. So you're choosing money over family? I closed my eyes. You already did that. The call ended abruptly after that. She hung up without saying goodbye. In the days that followed, the guilt tried to creep back in. Old habits don't disappear quietly. I caught myself wondering if I'd overreacted, if maybe I should have handled it more gently, if this boundary was too harsh. Then I remembered the truck. I remembered standing in the driveway, watching my future drive away while she told me I could start over. That memory steadied me. She didn't back down. Instead, she shifted tactics. Text messages came in, some angry, some pleading. She reminded me of sacrifices she'd made when I was younger. She warned me that Mark felt uncomfortable now, that I'd created tension in the house. I didn't respond, not because I didn't care, but because responding would have pulled me back into the same role, fixer, mediator, absorber of blame. For the first time, I let the discomfort exist without rushing to resolve it. And something unexpected happened. The world didn't fall apart. My mom didn't collapse without my help. Bills got paid. Mark kept driving his truck. Life went on, just without my automatic contribution. That realization was both relieving and painful. It meant I hadn't been essential because I was irreplaceable. I'd been essential because I was convenient. And once I stopped being convenient, Everything adjusted. Slowly, I felt lighter. Not happier. Not yet. But steadier. Like I'd finally placed my feet on solid ground instead of constantly leaning forward to catch someone else before they fell. The boundary my mom hadn't expected wasn't loud or cruel. It was simple. I stopped letting my life be the emergency fund for someone else's choices. Starting over didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a dramatic moment where everything suddenly fell into place. It was slower than that. Quieter. Built out of small, unglamorous choices made every day when no one was watching. I found a cheaper place to stay. Just a room. Really. With thin walls and a window that barely opened. It wasn't the apartment I'd imagined, but it was mine. I paid the deposit myself, handed over the money directly, and signed the paperwork with a strange mix of pride and sadness sitting in my chest. This time, no one could take it from me. Money stayed tight for a while. I worked extra shifts. I said no to things I used to say yes to without thinking. I learned how to sit with discomfort instead of fixing it for someone else. And slowly, something changed. I stopped checking my phone every time it buzzed, expecting my mom's name. I stopped rehearsing explanations in my head for decisions I was allowed to make without permission. I stopped feeling responsible for moods that weren't mine. My mom didn't apologize. Not really. She circled the truth without ever landing on it. She said things like, "I guess I just made the wrong call," or, "I didn't think you'd take it this hard." She talked about stress, about timing, about how hard things were for her. She never said she was wrong to use my savings, and I stopped waiting for her to. We spoke less, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Every conversation that stayed surface level felt safer, lighter. When she hinted at money, I changed the subject. When she complained about Mark's expenses, I listened politely and offered nothing. At first, that seemed to confuse her. Then it frustrated her. Eventually, she adapted. Mark kept his truck. He kept working. Life didn't collapse without my contribution the way I'd been warned it would. The crisis my mom had used to justify everything turned out to be survivable without me sacrificing myself. That realization was bittersweet, because it meant I hadn't been needed the way I'd believed. I'd been relied on because it was easier than making harder choices. As months passed, I began to rebuild. Not just financially, but internally. I trusted myself more. I noticed how much mental space had been freed up now that I wasn't constantly managing someone else's emergencies. I slept better. I laughed more easily. I felt less tense walking into my own space. Starting over, it turned out, wasn't the punishment my mom had made it sound like. It was a reset. Not the kind she'd given away casually, but one I chose for myself. One evening, as I was unpacking groceries in my tiny kitchen, I caught myself smiling for no particular reason. It surprised me. I stood there for a moment, realizing that I hadn't thought about the truck or the money or the betrayal all day. Not because it didn't matter anymore, but because it no longer defined me. I had lost something important, but I hadn't lost myself. If anything, I'd finally stopped giving myself away piece by piece to prove that I was strong enough to survive it. My mom once told me I could start over. She was right about that. She just never expected me to do it without her.